Hello world, it's Birdo Prey 5, Qapla. This fourth episode of Star Trek Picard is titled Absolute Candor. And here is my absolute candor. This isn't Star Trek. I'm reminded of Star Trek Enterprise, which for the first 2 seasons thought it was too cool for the Star Trek name, and it was just titled Enterprise. It wasn't until poor ratings forced them to add Star Trek back into the title in a desperate move to please longtime fans did they do so. This is kind of the complete opposite situation. What would please me most about Star Trek Picard is removing Star Trek from its name. By all rights, it should just be called Picard, and the title screen should say, loosely based on Star Trek The Next Generation by Gene Roddenberry. Why do I say this isn't Star Trek? Well, in this episode alone, Picard uses a Starfleet comm badge as a cell phone. That is to say, he holds it up to his ear so no one else can hear what's being said but him. While privacy is a nifty feature, every previous communicator, whether handheld or on their uniform, was public to everyone. There was no reason we need not hear what was being said. Picard himself repeats it anyway. Transporters. Transporters seem to have gotten upgrades. Now you can apparently walk while being transported. You can even put your sword away while being transported. I wonder what else you can do while physically disembodied in the matter stream. Speaking of swords, sure, we've seen bladed weapons in Trek for a long time, and in the case of the transporter I just mentioned, I understand why the character Elnor has a sword. But just seconds before that scene, there's an entire community of Romulans that seems to be carrying around swords like they're swashbuckling pirates. And yes, we have full-on decapitation. I was waiting for the Mortal Kombat announcer to say fatality. But at least it was only an adult who loses his head this time, and not a baby. You remember the baby, right? Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Episode 3, Point of Light? 2 heads for just the price of $5.99 a month with commercials? Picard seemingly doesn't need a uniform. Despite it being 14 years ago, and in a flashback when Picard was still an Admiral and on duty, with his ship in orbit, he beams down in civilian clothing. Why? Was a Starfleet uniform too offensive for these Romulans that Starfleet was going out of their way to save? Give me a break. We've never seen Starfleet personnel out of uniform while on duty, unless it was a pre-warp civilization or otherwise doing reconnaissance or undercover work, or if their name was Counselor Troy. The warp effect. We finally get underway only to see the ship at warp looks nothing like it did in real Trek. It's closer to Star Wars hyperspace or the JJ-verse warp effect. And the dialogue. Another episode of gratuitous F-bombs. It's not just cursing either. Every spoken word in every line of dialogue comes out of 2020 popular speech. There is not even an attempt to write for a more enlightened future. So yes, they need to drop Star Trek from its name. But despite all of this, I still enjoyed this episode, as did Mamo Prey. We both really look forward to next week. Although, wow, next week could be a mess looking at the previews. For those who don't understand why I like this show, and how I can like Picard but hate Discovery, as Nerdrotic has asked, and by the way, thank you so much, Gary, for the mentions this week, and hello to all the new subscribers. I can't speak for Gary, but I know that to this day, I have no idea the names of several characters on STD. These people were in almost every episode, but I couldn't tell you their names. But in Picard, I know the name of every major character except Narek's sister, who clearly wants to go all Cersei on him, but that's a story for another day. Dr. Jurati, Laris, Zhaban, Commodore O, Daz, Shoji, Elnor, Rafi, and Rios. Any character who has had more than a single line, I know their names. Not because I studied, but because I cared. Hell, even the Hospitality hologram is called Mr. Hospitality, if you watch with the closed captioning on, and I will never forget that. So if organically knowing the names of the characters isn't proof the show is definitively better, then I don't know what else to say. Like last week, I need to give this a split score. As a Star Trek show, Picard is lackluster. However, as a sci-fi show loosely based on Star Trek The Next Generation, it's entertaining. It's even fun. I was worried I was not going to like the new characters, but Dr. Jeri is both the comic relief and Miss Exposition, serving as the most used way to transmit information to the audience. Rios and all the hologram characters he plays are entertaining, and knowing the same actor is playing this range of roles, each one with different accents, looks, and personalities, is pretty cool. Elnor has a great backstory, and I hope he does well. And even Rafi is growing on me. Maybe I drank the Kool-Aid. If I did, I don't remember, but I'm not going to complain that Picard is the show I look forward to each week. Well, behind the exozone, anyway. 2 things I needed to look up this week. The first was during the flashback when Picard was reading the Three Musketeers to a young Elnor, and Elnor asked what parried meant. Being I was never into fencing, where it's most used, it means to counter an attack, usually with a sword or weapon. Picard tells Elnor he'll show him what it means tomorrow, but that tomorrow never comes. Turns out it was foreshadowing for 14 years later. Next, there is the mention of one of the classes of ships that helped evacuate tens of thousands of Romulans. It's the Wallenberg class. When I looked this up, it's obviously based on Raoul Wallenberg, who was a Swedish diplomat, noted for saving over 10,000 Jews from the bad people. Yeah, like them. From occupied Hungary in World War II. Okay, so let's go through this episode. The episode opens with a flashback to 14 years prior. Admiral Picard beams down to a Romulan relocation colony. Everyone is happy to see him. He's a hero. A young Romulan boy, Elnor, is living with a group of Romulan warrior nuns who have been helping relocate hundreds of thousands of Romulans coming in. The nuns practice Absolute Candor, the title of this episode. It's exactly what it sounds like, being absolutely and brutally honest about everything with everyone. Picard gets a call that the synths attack Mars, and he must leave immediately. Opening credits. We see Jeri Ryan as guest starring. Next, Rios is on the bridge alone, reading the same book he was reading last week, The Tragic Sense of Life. Dr. Jeri comes up to talk how bored she is on the ship and makes small talk. Jeri asks what the book is about, which turns into a conversation killer. Rafi shows up to break the tension, and she is pissed that Rios changed course. They were supposed to be heading to Freecloud. Rios says Picard said he needed to make a stop first. They're going to the same planet we saw in the flashback. Rafi is not happy. Now we see Picard opening his windows overlooking his vineyard, but he pauses the program, showing us it's just a hologram. Turns out there was an emergency hospitality hologram who made contact with Zhaban back on Earth and got precise holo recordings of the vineyard. Now they can save big money by filming space scenes back on the vineyard. Rios and Rafi come into the vineyard hologram, and Rafi tries to get Picard to go directly to Freecloud. Rios explains the planet they are going to is in a very dangerous area of space, now run by local warlords. One of them even got their hands on an old Romulan bird of prey. Jeri shows up because she wants to be part of the group. Despite Rafi's best efforts, Picard will not change his mind. Back to the Romulan artifact, aka Borg Cube, we see Soji playing with the Romulan tarot cards, which actually turned out to be plain Romulan playing cards after all, and watching recorded logs of Ramda before she was assimilated. She talks about the Day of Annihilation, the end of all life everywhere, which will be brought about by the Destroyer. Soji pauses the playback and stares into the eyes of Ramda on the recording. Soji is clearly disturbed. Back aboard the ship, everyone is on the bridge, and the planet is visible outside the main window with a noticeable shield around it. Picard asks for an update. Rafi says it has a standard impenetrable shield, an orbital killer drone. They need to get authorization to get through, even if they will just be beaming Picard down and up. Picard says they can get clearance simply by calling Central Station, and Rafi says that was the first thing she tried. Central Station no longer cared for Picard. This is the first hint we get that the Romulans no longer have the reverence for Picard they did 14 years ago. Picard asks for suggestions, and Rios says a cash gift is always helpful. In the next scene, we see Picard beam down, and things could not be more different than 14 years prior. Few people pay attention to him, and those who do look at him with scorn. He tried to say hello in Romulan, but no one wants to have anything to do with him. Picard walks to the warrior nun's compound, and the head nun is the first one to smile and is happy to see Picard. He is welcomed, but being brutally honest, he's told he's gotten old, which of course he has. Picard says he needs their help one last time, and an older Elnor happens to enter unexpectedly and sees Picard for the first time in 14 years. Cut to commercial. We're now back on the Borg cube. Soji and Narek are talking over the body of Ramda, who appears to be in some sort of stasis. Soji and Narek continue their conversation at what appears to be a mess hall or restaurant. Soji is asking Narek about his mysterious nature. He doesn't give any concrete answers. Not happy with the lack of answers, Soji says she'll have to stop trusting him. Narek implies he might be able to get her access to some classified Borg files on what happened to Ramda's ship when it was first assimilated, and perhaps what went wrong. This gets Soji's attention back. Long story short, 5 minutes later they are ice skating in a Borg ventilation return. Okay, so they don't have ice skates on, but they've taken off their shoes. There's no ice, but for all practical purposes they are ice skating. This is just the most cringy scene of the episode and the series to this point. How anyone thought this would be a good idea, I'll never know. So Narek and Soji start making out after doing some skating when Narek tells her she wasn't listed as being on the ship she claims she was on that brought her to the Borg cube. She gets pissed because Narek thinks she's lying, and he reminds her that the classified Borg files he can maybe get, and she sighs and turns back towards him. Back on the ship, Rafi is sipping some drink and looking at the computer when it starts alarming. She tells Rios and Jurati that they've ID'd him, meaning Picard. Apparently she is monitoring Romulan social media, and a lot of them are angry Picard returned. They tried to beam Picard up, but he refuses and says he needs more time. Also, Rios sees that the Romulan bird of prey just entered sensor range. Picard is back with the nuns and is trying to get one of them to join his cause. The main nun tells him he should take Elnor, and assures him Elnor is as trained as any of the nuns, but as a guy he does not belong there anyway. Picard agrees and tries to talk Elnor into joining his cause. They reminisce. They talk about when Picard used to visit, and Elnor remembers Picard's stories about Data. Picard explains he believes Data has a daughter, who is in danger and one has already been killed. Ultimately, Elnor is angry. Picard only came to see him when he needed something and leaves. Picard contacts the ship to beam up, fearing he isn't going to get anyone from this planet. Rios tells Picard they'll have to wait 7 minutes until there's an opening in the planetary shield to beam him out. So Picard heads back over where he initially beamed down. Lots of Romulans are still upset at Picard, but he tears down a sign that says Romulans only, and sits at a table at a Romulan restaurant, but no one will serve him. A Romulan comes over to Picard and says he's met Picard before. He used to be a Romulan senator and was there the day Picard gave his speech to the Senate about how Starfleet is going to help them. After the synth attack on Mars, though, they were abandoned, and they all blame Starfleet and Picard directly for their current plight, even though they all owe their lives to Picard. The senator demands to sword fight Picard, but Picard says no. But the senator's friends drag Picard into the street and give him a sword. Picard throws it down, but the senator doesn't immediately back off. Elnor shows up and cuts the senator's head clean off. Elnor warns everybody that he is now bound to Picard, and anyone who attempts to hurt Picard is choosing to die. Picard starts apologizing for the Federation, for Starfleet, and for himself, for leaving the Romulans to themselves. A Romulan in the crowd is about to shoot them when the ship hails and asks if Picard is ready to beam up. He screams now. and somehow they know to beam up both him and Elnor. Once aboard the ship, Picard makes Elnor promise not to kill anyone else unless it's absolutely necessary. Picard then introduces Elnor to Raffi and Dr. Jurati. They all walk towards the bridge, and Picard asks Elnor why he changed his mind. Elnor says Picard's cause fits the criteria. Jurati asks what's the criteria. Picard says the cause must be a lost cause. One more time, back at the Borg cube, we see a woman's hand caressing Narek in his sleep. He wakes up in a panic, and we see it's his very hot, but very weird sister. She reminds him that Soji is the destroyer, not a girlfriend. She teases him about him having a relationship with a machine, and being way too hands-on for his sister. He says he managed to plant the seed of doubt in Soji, and the sister is angry all he has done was plant one seed. She gives him one final week of doing things his way before she takes over. I'm really hoping these two are not blood-related. Maybe one of them is adopted. Still weird, but, less so. Finally, we're back on Picard's ship and has just come under attack by the Romulan bird of prey. Rios' ship is far more maneuverable, and it's unclear why they didn't simply warp away, but plot issues demand they stick around a few more minutes. Rios activates yet another emergency hologram, also of course played by the same actor. This hologram, Emmett, is the weapons officer, but he seems quite lazy and only speaks Spanish. It's actually quite funny. They need to dodge not only the bird of prey, but also the planet's security grid, which is also attacking them now for reasons. The ship is taking a beating. Still unsure why they didn't go to war, but finally the plot catches up and a small unidentified ship appears out of nowhere and fires back at the bird of prey. The two ships working in tandem manage to cut a nacelle off the bird of prey, but it gets off one last phaser blast that disables the unknown ship. Before it's destroyed in the planet's security shield, Raffi beams out the unknown pilot, who everyone assumed was a guy. It turns out it was 7 of 9, who manages to say, "You owe me a ship, Picard," before collapsing. End of episode. I strongly recommend you watch this show. I quite enjoyed it, and there are plenty of details I glanced over that will keep you interested even if you listen to all this. As a cool sci-fi show, I have to give this episode an 8 out of 10 easy for all the reasons I've mentioned. However, for all the other reasons I've mentioned, I can only give this a 5 of 10 as a Star Trek episode. If you average them, that's a 6.5, but I personally prefer the split score. You'll know which one applies to you. I'd love a Star Trek show I could rate an 8, but I haven't been able to do that since Star Trek Enterprise. I hope you find this review useful. Please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. If you want to help the channel, the best thing you can do is share it. Share it on Twitter, Facebook, and accidental all-company email. Whatever you can do. Check out birdoprey5.com for donations, channel links, merch, and other fun stuff. Thank you, and Qapla.